As a young boy, I lived in the northwest of Western Australia during the late 1970s and early 1980s. We lived in a town called Karratha. Now, one of the striking features of the northwest of Western Australia, with all the towns that are up there, are the size of the tides. Where we had come from before, the size of tides in the southwest were standard, 1 metre. That's nothing unusual for anywhere else. But in the northwest of Western Australia, the tides up there are up to 11 metres. And what that visually looks like is you can stand at a beachfront at the start of the day and have the ocean right up to the very edge of the beach. But by the end of the day, that ocean could have receded right out as far as the horizon. And when you look out the horizon on these very, very low tides, all you can see as far as you go is sand and that thin blue line on the horizon, which is now where the ocean has receded to. I have a memory of this one time I was sitting on the beach and the tide was rolling in. It was a very flat day. There were no waves whatsoever. And there was great excitement for me to build a sandcastle. And I built this sandcastle with these walls. And what I was going to do was hold back the tide. And sure enough, this tide began to inch its way in. Because the water was flat on the day, it just looked like a slow-moving snail moving up. And soon the water touched the very edge of my sandcastle, and my sandcastle held together. And then the water moved a bit further in. It started to come to the sides of my sandcastle. So I started to build the walls up bigger, and it held its ground. Then the water came right up, almost around the back of it. And I just kept building the walls up further and further, and I found myself being able to stand in this sandcastle quite safe from the water. I was in control. And then my parents would call out to me and say, we have to go home. So I'd get out and run up to the beach and off we go. You'd come to the beach the next day, castle's gone. Completely wiped out by the tide. I'm now in my early 50s and I'm starting to find there's quite a few sandcastles lying around in life. One of them is video stores. When I was born in 1970, there were no such thing as video stores or VHS players or DVDs or anything. Then they started to emerge in the 1980s, and there was a huge popularity with video stores. And I just assumed video stores were here to stay. But now in the year 2023, video stores have gone. They've been wiped out by the tide. There are changes that are happening in modern culture at such a rapid rate. We're seeing sandcastles emerging left, right and centre. Things that used to be positions of power, positions of influence, positions of popularity are coming and going rapidly. Well, it's inconceivable these days that could be anything could last for 20 years, let alone 100 years. But at the time of Jesus, there was one unstoppable force that was in existence that seemed to be there for all eternity. And that unstoppable force was Rome. Rome was an empire that would actually last in history for nearly 1,000 years. And at the time of Jesus, they were at their absolute peak. They were conquering nation after nation. The armies were invincible. They were a professional army which had not been seen before. They weren't just a whole ragtag group of farmers that had been called on when a war was happening. They were training the whole time. And Rome were winning battle after battle even when they were outnumbered. This is the might of Rome. There is a showdown that happens in John's Gospel between Jesus and Rome. Rome, under the leadership in Israel of Pontius Pilate, had no interest in the religious views of the Jewish people. That was not their concern. Their concern was entirely power. Was there anyone who was a threat to Rome? There were always whispers of some form of uprising happening against Rome from certain areas within the Jewish people. So when Pontius Pilate gets this tip-off that Jesus is allegedly claiming to be a king and he's going to establish a kingdom, Pontius Pilate is onto this. And he quizzes Jesus. He interrogates him. And he says to Jesus, do you understand that if you are making a threat to Rome, I will have you finished? Is it true that the people who are out here baying for your blood right now are claiming that you are trying to be a king and you want to establish a kingdom. If this is true, you need to tell me now. Is it true? And Jesus doesn't answer him. Pontius Pilate, you can feel the tension building. He just doesn't know what to do with Christ. And he warns him. He says, I need you to answer me because I have the power to have you finished. Are you a king? And then Jesus turns to Pontius Pilate and he says to him, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight right now to prevent my arrest. My kingdom is from a different place. This is not the first time Jesus has claimed this. On the night of his arrest, when the soldiers were coming up the hill to take him away, Peter pulls out his sword and tries to defend Jesus by bringing this sword down on the side of this servant's head, slices his ear off. And Jesus turns to Peter and says, put that sword away. Don't you understand, Peter? If I wanted to, I could call on my Father right now and he would send 12 legions of angels to fight for me. 12 legions of angels. The Romans at best had 1 to 2 legions they could call on in Israel. And Jesus is coming up with this extraordinary number. Jesus is claiming authority, but not authority as this world understands it. What happens next is well documented. Pontius Pilate decides to have Jesus executed. Now, he doesn't make this decision because he himself has quizzed Jesus and concluded that this Jesus is a threat to Rome. Not at all. Instead, what is a problem for Pilate is the crowd. It's the crowd who are baying for Jesus' blood. And Pilate himself, knowing that the crowd could riot, decides it's better to keep the peace and make this decision to have Jesus executed, even if it's wrong. What's really happening, of course, in scriptures is there are religious leaders at this time going in and out of the crowd, manipulating the crowd to make this decision. And how often do we see in history this happening? A small group of people manipulating the popular crowd shouting out to their leaders to make a decision which is not right, and the leaders, to keep the peace, decide to go with the decision. But that's how we see power. We think power is might, power is aggression, power is threats, and we have to bow down to that. But Jesus says that the power he's referring to, his authority, is not of this world. It's from another realm. And Jesus' power does not operate like that of the world. If Pontius Pilate was to stand here in 2023 and observe this world today, I think there would be 2 things that would completely shock him beyond all belief. First of all, that Rome has been reduced to a bunch of monuments, tourist attractions. Rome has simply become the sandcastles of the world because it has been wiped out through history. And he would be thinking, how could we possibly have an empire vanish as it has when we had all the power, all the might and all the money? But the second thing that would blow his mind would be to find out that the largest religious group in the world today, are people who claim to be followers of Jesus of Nazareth, who he signed off to be executed. Because you see, real authority works like this. It's like a tide. It slowly comes in, inch by inch. It comes around the sandcastles of the world, not through aggression or violence, but it goes to the side of them, around them, and past them. And this is the authority that Jesus is referring to. Because in the end, when Jesus' authority has surpassed everything, his authority is either going to be around you or it's going to be in you.